So this tutorial is a response to some of the misinformation that you'll find online, and that's from AWS and also Bitnami, the software library manager that's installed onto Lightsail. So this is going to take you through how to actually deploy Django, or actually deploy Django step by step within Lightsail. I'll give you a quick overview of Lightsail as well. And then I'll take you through, if you want to, how to upload and download files using SFTP, and then also how to connect remotely through SSH to your server. We will get straight into deploying Django in Lightsail, but I just point out that Lightsail is a very simple AWS service that allows us to spin up or start virtual machines in the cloud, and we can choose our operating system and the software we want installed, and then we can just go ahead and connect as if we were working on our own machine. So we're going to be utilizing Linux here initially, and then we have a look at Windows. You can see that there is, or this service is a paid service, but typically I think it's paid per hour. So you don't get the upfront cost. Here it says $3.50 or £8 or $8, sorry, a month. So you can see that you get 1 month free on the free tier offer if you want to trial this out. And it is a really introductory type of service to AWS. So there's not massive amount of configuration here that we need to do. We can simply just start the server virtual machine and then just get going. So let's have a look to see how this works. So the first task is to sign up to AWS and then sign in. Once you've done that, you'll be then presented with your AWS Management Console. From here, there is a number of ways of getting to Lightsail, but at the top left-hand side here, you've got services. So we can either type it in here, or you can just find it in the list. So we're going to select Lightsail. If you haven't used Amazon Lightsail before, you'll be presented with this screen. You have no instances right now. If you're not familiar with Lightsail, what it's actually providing, we're going to be building a VPS. Of course, if you're not familiar with VPS, I'm not going to go through the nuts and bolts of what a VPS is, but essentially what it is a virtual machine. So somewhere in the AWS cloud, Amazon are going to create a virtual machine. So a computer essentially with a certain amount of resources that we're going to select, and then we will then log into that machine and start our server, our Django server, etc. So it's basically like having a computer, but in the cloud. Now we can configure our virtual machine in terms of the location where we want it to be actually placed. So in this case, I've just selected the UK, and we've got a choice of 2 operating systems, Windows and Linux. For this particular tutorial, I'll go through Linux first, and then we'll move to Windows. So I'll do both of these. So first of all, I'll select Linux. So you can see here, there's a list of software that we can pre-install into our VPS. This library software is actually maintained or generated through Bitnami service. So if you wanted to read a little bit more about that, you can, but essentially this software or this company is providing a library service, which is then bolted onto Lightsail so that we can select these options here. And then essentially what will happen is that they will then get installed, but it will be installed however Bitnami is configured and defined. And this is part of the problem that I found if you look at any other guides on how to install Django using Lightsail or using Lightsail to install Django. There's a lot of misinformation. So the actual Amazon Lightsail Django guide doesn't work. And in addition to that, the Bitnami guide also doesn't work. Now, when you consider that the Amazon guide is only 20 days old as of creating this tutorial, there needs to be a little bit more help, I think, in getting people started with Django and Lightsail. Go ahead and select Django. It's recently been updated to 3.1. And now we've got some more options down here. So in order for us to connect externally into our VPS, we need to make sure that we build a secure connection. So we need an SSH key to do that. Now what we can do is we can set up a separate key for this particular instance by selecting change SSH key pair, and then we can just create a new. All you need to do then is just select, create, add a name, and so on. And then it will then appear in this list here. So I've already created 2. So I'm just going to select the one I want to use for this particular instance. It's handy to go ahead actually and download this. So go ahead and download that. We need that shortly when we start working with the software that connects to this instance. So now we can select the plan. So you can see that Lightsail is a paid service. It's off the top of my head, I think it's a paid hourly. So although it says price per month here, you're not going to pay a solid $5 a month and be locked into a contract. So this will work on a hour by hour case so that if you do delete your instance, you don't pay. Now that's important to remember. So if you don't want to pay, then just delete the instance. If you just wanted to trial this out. And in addition to that, if you were just to stop the instance, it does remind you, but you also get charged. So you actually have to delete the instance not to get charged. There are some final options down here, for example, identifying the instance, give it a name, and we've got some key-only tags, which at the moment, that really isn't an important thing to mention here. As it says here, you can use tags to organize your billing, etc. So let's just go ahead and create the instance. So that's going to take a couple of seconds to load up. While that is doing that, let's just have a look around at this initial administration area. So there are 2 administration areas, one when we go into Django instance and this one here, the outer instance or admin area. So you can see here that we can build some databases. So we've got the option of MySQL and PostgreSQL. Now, obviously we can go ahead and do that if you want, but Django will work as per normal, as if you're building on your own machine, utilizing the MySQL-like database. So there's no real need at the moment to create that if you just wanted to use the MySQL database. So let's go back. So we've also got another option here with networking. So this is where we can explore some of the other AWS services. We've got static IP addresses, which we can set up, load balancers, distribution, a CDN, and a DNS zone. So these are advanced options, which I'm not going to cover in this tutorial. We're just going to get some basic Django instances working. So let's go back into storage. So we can add some additional storage if we want to, if we run out. And then we got a powerful tool, Snapshot. So this is a good backup tool that we can utilize to snapshot our instance. And it's pretty handy. Obviously, it's important to back up. So our instance is now up and running. So it says running. Like I said, we've got 2 options, stop and delete. Remember, if you press stop, I think it actually tells you here that you will incur charges still. So you need to actually delete the instance to not incur charges. So now we've got this up and running. Let's have a look at the admin area or some of the admin options. So we're going to manage. You can see that there's a few more options here. So storage is just going to show the storage that you've got available and the disk path, if that's important to your development. We've got some metrics here so we can monitor our CPU and so on. That's going to give us a general idea of our capacity and whether we need to update or upgrade our service. Because this is a sliding scale, of course, we can upgrade whenever we want to a different package, pay more and get more resources. The next option, networking, this is something that we're going to need to move into shortly and add a new port. Now, if you remember, Django uses port 8000 by default. So while we're developing or while we're in the development stage, we can add a new rule here, and we will come back to this, but I'll show you this now. We can add port 8000 or whatever port you want to use on the custom TCP protocol. Remember, TCP protocol, part of the, we're looking at maybe HTTP, that's what we're using. So HTTP is within the TCP protocol. So let's go ahead and save that, create that. So now we've got that available. So you can see we've got HTTPS ready and HTTP, and we've got a SSH, up and running on port 22. So that's our firewall. We also have load balancing and distribution if we set that up as well. But like I said, we're not going to cover that in this tutorial. So we've got snapshots again, so we can make some more snapshots and manage those. Tags, again, that's just to do with key value tags. It can be used to organize your billing, etc. We've got history, which is handy to know. And then we've got delete. So we can also delete the instance here. That was a quick run through of all the different options we've got available here. Fairly simple options. There's nothing there that really needs any deep analysis or introduction at this point, apart from maybe the networking tools we've mentioned. Now we've got two options up here, reboot and stop, so we can control our machine in that way. And you can see here we've got 1 gig of RAM, 1 CPU, and a 40 gig solid state drive. Now important also, we have 2 IP addresses for this machine. We're going to be utilizing the public IP address to view our Django instance. So that's all we really need to know about at this point. What we might want to do is just take our IP address, open that up, and then put it into the browser. And you can see straight away we're congratulated because we are now running the Bitnami Django 3.1.0 in the cloud. So that's the default homepage. When we have a look at the files and folders, I'll just point that out so you know where that is coming from. So let's have a look at configuration and actually then getting Django working. So if we go back to the connect option, we've got this connect using SSH. So that's how we're going to start. We're going to use the shell in this case. I'll go through some different commands that we can utilize to get Django working. Now, if you want to, if you select the Lightsail and go back, there's also the option here of going into the console. So I'm just going to use that for now. They both take you to the same place, and then you'll be presented with the console here. So now we're in Linux. So this is just a Linux machine that we've created. So it works exactly the same way. So if I type in ls, that's going to list all the folders and files. If I press, for example, cd for change directory, I can go back to the root. I'm going to do this manually. There's 2 folders here that we're in deep. So we go back here. We're now in the root, type in ls. You can see it's just Linux. Okay, so we're placed inside of this home folder. So that's where we currently were. So let's change directory to that. And then I'll just move this up a bit to make it more central for you. And then we're in the home folder now. In the home folder is the Bitnami folder. So most of the guys recommend for us to start in this folder. And that's probably to do with folder and file permissions. So let's go into the CD Bitnami. So I don't actually have to type in the whole word. I can just press tab if you're not familiar with utilizing the terminal in that way. So now I'm inside of that folder. You see we've got some folders here. If you follow some of the guides online, it's going to say that there is an app folder here, but Bitnami have confirmed that they've moved away from that. So you won't find a folder called app. And now it's a recommendation to make a folder here and then put your Django project inside of that. Now, previously I showed you the home page, this home page here, congratulations. Now, if you wanted to have a look at that, or if you want to know, sorry, where that is, well, it is where we're looking, it's an old instance. I think it's an old instance. Is where basically we were looking. No, that's our instance. Okay. So inside of here, it timed me out, apologies. So inside of the htdocs folder, we have a file here called index.html. So we can open that up if we want and have a look. But all that you're going to see is, as I've mentioned, the website that we're looking at earlier, this one here. So you could just go ahead, and if you were just building a website, you could just plonk all the data or the files into here, and then it would just serve as per normal. So obviously what we want to do is to create a Django project. So now let's go ahead and create a new Django project. So by utilizing the Bitnami Django instance, it's already created, it's already installed, sorry, Python, you would assume. It already has Django installed. So what we can now do is just go ahead and use the Django admin as per normal, but obviously we need to create a folder. So let's do a mkdir for make directory. Now with these admin commands, if you're not familiar with utilizing Linux, we normally need to tell Linux we want to create a folder or do some administration tasks by defining that we're going to do this as an administrator. So sudo is a keyword for that, to tell Linux that we want to do this as the administrator or as the administrator. So let's go ahead and just create a new directory. So mkdir, and then we're just going to call this, following some of the guides, projects. Okay, so we've got a folder now called projects. So we can now cd into projects. I used the tab again there. And now what we can do is make a Django instance. So Django admin, and then start project as per normal, and then start a new project. So I'm just going to call this core as per normal. And I should still have the option of the additional dot parameter, so I can define where I actually want the project to be created. So, but in this case, I'm going to use the folder. So I use the dot. So that'll take a couple of seconds as per normal. And then we can have a look at what's being created. So there we go. So in actual fact, we can't do this by default. So we need permissions from that folder. We need to set up the permission in that folder so that we can perform some of these operations. So let's do that first. So I've typed in clear. So clear, that just clears the screen there. And now what we're going to do is cd. We're going to go back one directory in ls, and you can see that we've now got a folder called project. We already know that, sorry. So we need to make it so that we can access the project folder as the user, and so that we can perform these operations. So this is a permissions task. We need to change the permissions of this folder. Now what we can do is if we do ls and then do a switch of L, we can actually see the ownership of this folder. So the projects folder here is owned by root. And what we want to do here is change this. Now the user that we're logged in as is going to be called Bitnami. So this is just something that has already been set up. So when we use Bitnami, the user is Bitnami. So I think on different operating systems that might change slightly, but at least here in Linux, our root user is going to be called Bitnami. So essentially what we're doing now is we're going to change the project folder to the ownership of Bitnami, who we are, as we're logged in, so that we can then perform operations in this folder. So let's go ahead and type in sudo, because we want to run an admin type of command, and then use the command chown to change the ownership. And then we want to use the user. So in this case, we use $user to define the user. That's the user we're logged in as. And now we need to define the folder, which was projects. So press enter, and let's do an ls -l again. And you can now see that we're the owner of this folder. If you wanted to master permissions on Linux, for example, and you're new to this, then definitely this over here is describing who has access and what type of access that user or that type of user may have in this folder. So this here is a representation of permissions for this particular folder and file. So this is something that you would want to learn more about, most definitely. This is just a pointer for you if you're interested in this type of work, to go ahead and now just read up a little bit more about these permissions here. So I think we're now ready to go back into projects. So let's go back into projects and then cd projects, sorry. And now let's go ahead and now do the Django admin again. And then start project. And we want to then create a new project called core. So if I list this out now, you can see that it's now being installed in this projects folder. So the dot is representing here, if you're not familiar with that, the fact that I wanted to actually put the project inside of this folder, this projects folder, and not make a new folder. So if I didn't have the dot here at the end, then it would make a new folder called core, and then the application core inside of that. So I'm just going to be utilizing this projects folder as the main folder for this Django instance. Okay, so now we've got this started. We can, if we want to, just go ahead, and this is very similar. If you're familiar with Django, you know what we're doing now. So we can now do a Python and then we can use the manage.py file to maybe start an app. We'll just call this app blog, for example. So we can then wait for that to run, and then ls, and you can see that we've created an app. So you can see this is working exactly the same way as if we were going to build an app on our own machine. We're just using a machine that's in the cloud. So let's just go ahead and migrate this. Migrate. Thank you. There we go. So we've migrated the database, or the initial database. And of course, now we can go ahead and run the server. I keep doing that. Apologies. Run server. I'm used to Windows. There we go. So you can see what's happening now is we've started this development server at 127.0.0.1 port 8000. A familiar story I see in some of the guides is that it tells you to utilize your IP address that's been provided to you, your local IP address. So remember, if we go back to the main instance, we've got two IP address, the private and the public, and we're told to utilize this one here and the port 8000 as per normal. But if you were to do that, let's go ahead and try that. We will find it doesn't work, but I'll just show you anyway. So run server, and then the IP address, which we need to paste in, and then it just says we can't use that. Well, in actual fact, we should define a port number, shouldn't we? But it will tell you that we can't utilize that, so that IP address can't be assigned to. So that isn't the solution, and I think some people have found that to be a problem. So we've got two options at the moment, the 127, the local host, and we've also then got our IP address. So none of those will work easily. So therefore, what we should be doing, if we just bring up the last command, is we should be utilizing, or one of the ways of getting this working is to utilize all the zeros. So if you're familiar to networking, 0 just represents or tells the device to check for all numbers. So 0 basically means all numbers. So if you've got for example, the subnet mask, if you've ever seen a subnet mask for an IP address, some of the zeros, some of the subnet mask numbers are a 0. And that's just telling the computer again to check all those numbers. So what's going to happen now is we're just running this server essentially on any IP address we desire. So now, if we were to run this, so it's now running on 0000. So let's go back into our instance, and let's just take this IP address. Let's go to a new browser, type in 8000, and there we go. So we've got Django working. Now, I'm not trying to trick you out at the second, but I wondered if you can guess why it's coming up with this problem. So if you remember, in Django, we actually have to define the allowed hosts. So this does tell me that Django is working, but because we've got this invalid or disallowed host, it says here you may need to add to the allowed host. So the allowed host, if you remember, is in your settings file. So I'm going to copy that. We can then go back to our terminal here. So we'll just close that, Control and C to close that. We'll clear that off. So let's just explore our project. So if we go into the core, for example, now you don't have to go into one folder and file at a time. You can obviously chain this up, but I'm just showing you now. So we'll cd into the core, and then you can see that we've got our settings file as per normal, of course. And now what we can do is open this up and change it. So what comes pre-installed is a program called Nano. So what we can do is open up Nano, and that will open up a text editor in our terminal here, essentially. So let's go ahead and do that. So from here, what we can do is just move down. This isn't going to be very friendly, but we can type in the IP address here, or hopefully I can paste it here. So let's go ahead and do that. Yep. Okay. So now we're given these instructions down here. So we need to read file. So let's do a Control and R. That's obviously read, but we want to write. So Control No, and then file name to write, settings.py, yep. So now just go ahead and press enter. And it says wrote 120 lines. So now we've updated the allowed hosts. So we can do the Control and X to exit, and then we can just clear that. So there's a few different text editors already installed in this instance. I think that's a little bit easier to utilize than some of the alternatives. So we'll show you some alternatives we can install locally to connect to this server. And obviously we can then use, for example, Visual Studio Code to actually then manage those files and make changes, etc. So let's just go ahead with that. And now go into the browser and refresh. And what we should have is a new instance if we were to actually turn it on, of course. So we need to actually turn this on, don't we? I've done that again. I'm in the core. Okay, I'm in the core. So make sure you go back. So I've typed in cd-back to go back. And you can now see we've got the manage.py file there in the directory. So it does mean now we can go ahead and use it. And we can then run the server. And like we did before, 0.0.0 and then colon 8000. So the server's running without a problem. And we can now go in and you can see that it now works. We now have our project up and running. So let's just remember why that is running. If you remember, we went into the instance and then networking. Remember that earlier we set up the port 8000. So that's why we're utilizing port 8000. That's why it's working. If we were to delete that port, you will find it doesn't work. I'll just show you. That will take a couple of seconds, but yeah, that's not going to work. Okay, so that definitely needs to be set up. Now, on some of the guides online, that does, you are told that. Some of the guides, you're not, which is a bit strange. So let's go ahead and put that back. And then refresh, and you can see it's working again. So hopefully you'll agree that if you did that once or twice, that is incredibly simple to get a Django instance up and running and working for web viewership. Now, there's a few questions that no doubt you're going to now ask. For example, how do I use a custom domain, for example? Well, I'm not going to cover that in this tutorial, so I do apologize. But if you wanted to do that, then what you need to do, just to give you a pointer, go back to Amazon Lightsail and then go into networking and then go to DNS zone. And then from here, it says enter the domain you have registered, and you can go ahead and then start to actually configure your domain to this service. It's a fairly simple process. I don't have one to show you right now. So if you do get stuck, if you do want that tutorial, let me know and I will build that tutorial, no problem. So now we've got that up and running. Our instance is working. Now we're going to switch across to our local machine and start thinking about how to connect and how to manage this from our own machine. Before we can connect externally from our own local machine to this instance, we just need to remember that we're going to need some sort of security password, for example. And this is what this Django SSH key that we generated earlier is going to provide us. So that's important that we created that. If you haven't created that, or if you're not too sure about that, we did go through this process at the start, but if you've lost that, if you didn't download it, you can just go to accounts and then have a look at your SSH keys. And then down here, these are the keys here, and you can just select one and download them. So that's how to download it again. We're going to use that in a second to actually connect to our machine. So I appreciate that everyone works slightly differently. Some people prefer to do things with integrated software. Some prefer to use standalone software. So this is just a popular piece of software which is going to provide a FTP solution so that we can connect to our instance and upload and download files fairly easily. So go ahead and download FileZilla, and I'll see you once you've installed it. So welcome to FileZilla. Now, what we need to do is to start off by going into Edit, and then Settings, and the SFTP settings, and add the key that you downloaded earlier. Now, if you didn't download this key, the quickest way is just to create a new instance. So what's happened is that when you create this instance, you define a key. If we go into Manage, you can see that this key is connected to the Django SSH1 key, and we should have downloaded it. And typically, we can only download this once. Now, we can go to Accounts and then go to Account and SSH and have a look and create a new key, but there's just not an easy way of then attaching it. So I'm just asking you nicely that when you create a new instance, just remember to download that key and save it somewhere safe. Okay, so I've downloaded my key and I've got it ready. So I've gone ahead here and I've just imported that in. My key was called Django SSH1, remember, .pem. So that's all in place in SFTP. So I press OK. And now what we need to do is go to File and Site Manager, and then create a new site, give it a name, and then use the public host IP address that's in our instance. So the 25, 35, 178, and so on there. And then we need to select SFTP in the protocol, login type, ask for password, and user is bitnami. So this is just the default username for our instance here. Now we set that up when we created a Django instance. Now, if we were to create, for example, a WordPress instance, that username might be slightly different. So just check that out if you're going to be utilizing any of the other services. Right, so there we go. So now we can go ahead and connect and establish a new connection. Now I've already typed in my password. That's why the box didn't come up. And you can now see I'm now logged in. So let's have a look to see what we can see. So on the right-hand side here are all the folders and files that are on your server. Left-hand side here, this is just your files and folder structure in your system. So this is just a Windows system that I'm using here. So now we've logged in, we can now start to actually navigate through the different options, or navigate through the folder file structure so that we can find our Django files. So this may seem a little bit strange, but we're just going to open this up. So on the right hand side here, this is a remote site. These are our files. On the left hand side, these are the files and folders that we might find inside of the folder. So inside of this / the home directory, we've got all these folders here. So what we can now do is we need to find the folder, which was home, if you remember, and then bitnami. And inside of here, we've got some files and folders. Now, if I were to select htdocs, that takes us to the index.html, but also notice that we've actually got projects, or the projects folder inside of this directory. Let's just go back to our SSH connection and let's just see this. So let's just list here. So we're inside of here. Remember, we just went into the htdocs, and inside of here, we now have projects. So now I don't remember putting my projects folder inside of there. I thought I'd create a new folder. So apologies if I did, but I thought I made a new folder. You can see, maybe I didn't. It's gone back into this folder here, but it doesn't matter. You get the idea of what's happening here. We can now navigate to the projects folder. We now have all the Django files. So at this point, we can, for example, download these, or additionally, we can just add some things to it. So if I just go ahead and create a new document here, and then just drag this in, you can see that's been uploaded. So let's go back into my console here, and then we're just going to change directory to projects, and then list everything inside of here. You can see we've got this new file here called new text document. So you can clearly see we've uploaded files utilizing FileZilla. And like I said, from here we can actually delete and so on. So we can manage our files. So what we might want to do here is obviously work locally. And when we're comfortable, we upload our files by putting them into this directory and then running the server. Obviously, that's one way that we can work. Simply for convenience, you may want to go ahead and download one of the extensions for Visual Studio Code, for example, or whatever package that you're utilizing. And of course, you can manage your SFTP connection from there. If, of course, you're familiar with uploading to a server, you'll probably already have your tools or your workflow set up. Amazon do provide some alternative options for uploading, for example. You can go through these. There's some topics here for that. Now, I just want to show you one last thing, and that's how to access the terminal from a remote machine. Now, a very popular option recommended online only, and this is why I'm showing you how to use it, is Putty. So let's go ahead and just download Putty. So this is a SSH and Telnet client. So we're going to be able to SSH into our server and access the command line from within our computer, from our external machine. So let's go ahead and download this and open it up, and I'll see you once you've done that. So this can be a little bit of a strange installation because you install it, you will receive a text file that will open up in your default text file software, and then that's it. So you then need to go to Start if you're using Windows and just type in Putty, and then open up the configuration. So here we are in the software, and now we need to go ahead and configure this so that we can log in through SSH, and then obviously access the terminal so that we can then type in commands and so on. So to get this working, sorry about the blank screen, to get this working, go to Start, and you're going to type in Putty Gen. So you can open up the Putty Gen app. Apologies, you can't see that. So this is what it looks like. So once you've got this, you need to load your downloads. And you're going to need to load up the file that we downloaded earlier, your key. So I've selected all files, and now I'm going to select the Django SSH1, remember? So I open that, and it tells me that I need to save this as a private key. So I press OK and save it as a private key. So you can utilize a password here, so that you can only use this if you type in the password. So that's the key passphrase if you want to type that in, so no one else can use it. And so press yes in this case if you don't want to add, and then just save it, and then press yes. I've just overwritten something there. So now I've got my key set. I can now go back into Putty, wherever that was. No. Oh, not too sure where that went. So open up Putty. And now we can configure this. So we need the IP address. So go back into the instance here. We're just going to grab the IP address. Okay. And port, we'll just save it like that. And then we're going to go into the SSH, and then we're just making sure that we go to auth, and then we're going to go to browse, and then select our key that we created. This is a PPK file. And there's nothing else we need to set there initially. So let's just press open. And it now opens up a new terminal. It says login as. So obviously our username is bitnami. And there we go. We're now into we're remoted into our server. And from here, we can do exactly the same thing as if we were going into the AWS website. So I can type in ls again, and you can see that I can see all my files. So let's just go into there, list those, and there we go. Okay, so that's two ways you can manage your files and server utilizing Putty or SSH tools like Putty, and FTP or SFTP tools like I showed you with FileZilla. Hello and welcome back to another tutorial. So in this tutorial, we're going to go through how to deploy a Django application to the AWS service Lightsail. So now we've had a look at Linux, let's go ahead and have a look at some of the options with Windows. So let's create a new instance. I've deleted the old one. I'm going to select Microsoft Windows. Now you can see you've got a few different options here, Server 2019, 16, and 12. So let's go ahead and just select the default here. There are some options here. But we go ahead and you can see that we've got the first month free. So we can select this option here. Now, this is slightly more expensive because probably you've got the overhead of the operating system costs. That's probably what's bumping up the price here. Now, you can try the selected plan free for 1 month up to 750 hours, which is great. So let's go ahead and select that. We've got our server instance again, so let's just create the instance. Now this is going to look exactly the same here. We've got the databases. There's no different options here. We've got the normal options there, the networking again, all the different bolt-on services, storage, and snapshots. So we're just going to wait for our instance to run. Now you can imagine this is probably going to take a couple more seconds than the Linux instance because it's a little bit lighter than Windows Server. And we're only running 512 mega RAM. So you can see here, once you've gone into the admin area for the instance, we're able to connect to this via RDP. So this is about as far as I'm going to take you here, because this is not really geared up to Django. This is a Windows server after all. And although that might be contentious, it's going to be a lot easier just to spin up a Linux server and get started utilizing Django within there. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend a Windows server for this type of development, although of course it is going to be possible. So I just wanted to show you that if you did want to set up a Windows machine, we're going to connect via RDP. You can use the Windows RDP client for that, so you can connect remotely and you'll be able to kind of visually see your server on screen and work with it in that manner. Thank you very much for listening again. Hopefully there was some value there for you. If there is any questions, then please leave them in the comments. Now, I have skipped maybe a few different items here, which I could have elaborated more on. I know that some community members have mentioned to try and give a little bit more detail, or have suggested in some areas to do that. Sometimes when you're in the moment, you forget, or it's very easy just to assume. And also there's a balance here of trying to provide enough information, but not to bore you at the same time, because I could talk for hours about all the different things we've just done there and all the different options that are available. But hopefully, the main point here is that you can see how easy it can be to start a Django instance inside of AWS Lightsail. And not only that, also the scalability, and of course we can then start to connect this to other options and really kind of build this out from a very small project to a medium-sized project.